Welcome back to the Ari Hoffman Show on Talk Radio 570 KVI. Remember, if you missed any part of the show, you can always get the podcast over at Google, Apple, Spotify, whatever your preferred podcast platform is. Remember, while you're there, to rate, subscribe, and share so that way you and your friends never miss a minute of the show. There's a museum you might not have heard about. It's called the Palestine Museum. It's located in Connecticut, and they have a special exhibit that's on tour right now. Joining us now to discuss on the KVI studio line is the executive director of the museum itself, Faisal Saleh. Thank you so much for being with us today, sir.
Thank you. My pleasure.
So tell me what this exhibit is about.
The current exhibit, which is in Venice, Italy, commemorates the 75th anniversary of the Palestinian Nakba. Nakba is catastrophe in Arabic, and that's the time when a great number of Palestinians were expelled from their homelands and became refugees in 1948 when the State of Israel was created.
Okay, so do you think that the modern-day State of Israel should exist?
It's not a question of whether the State of Israel should exist or not. The question is, when the State of Israel was created, 800,000 Palestinians were driven out of their home and lost their properties. The question is, how should those people be receive justice? They were thrown out of their homes, and they need to go back to where they came from. They want to go back to their towns and villages and live, and they're willing to live in peace with other people who want to live in peace. And they need to be compensated for 75 years of pain and suffering and loss of use of their property and their economic means.
What about the nearly 1 million Jewish refugees who were thrown out of Arab countries at the exact same time when the War of 1948 began?
They were not thrown out of there. Israel wanted to bring them to Israel to enhance the population there. A lot of them could have stayed in the Arab countries if they wanted. They were not really thrown out.
How many Jews are in Gaza right now?
There aren't any Jews in Gaza because Jews don't want to live in Gaza.
Okay, so how many Jews are in Iraq right now?
I really don't know. I'm not an expert on the statistics of that things. And the Jews were incentivized and encouraged to migrate to Israel.
So what you're saying is they weren't...
From Iraq and those countries, from countries all around the world. Israel wanted to bring all the Jews of the world into Israel.
You're saying that they weren't exiled from Egypt, Iraq, Iran, Syria, and Lebanon and other countries?
Not necessarily. I mean, Israel wanted to bring them to Israel. Israel was really working hard to increase the population there, and they went out of their way to bring Jews from the Soviet Union, from Europe.
Whoa, no. The Soviet Union didn't happen until the 1990s. So that didn't happen in 1948.
I mean, before that, Israel had a huge campaign to bring Jews from around the world into Israel, and not just from the Arab countries, but from all countries around the world. And they had a very strong stream of immigration into Israel.
So you're saying is that none of those countries ever exiled any Jews in 1948?
Not to my knowledge.
All right. You may want to brush up on that one. What does Nakba actually mean?
It means catastrophe.
Why is it a catastrophe?
Because close to 1 million Palestinians lost all their property, and they were thrown out and in the desert, in the mountains with no means of living, and they lost all their property, and they walked out or driven out with the shirts on their backs only.
So how come
catastrophe.
How come in villages like Salama, which is near Jaffa in Israel, that city was found deserted once Israel actually showed up to that city?
Because anybody who stayed there, they were going to kill them.
Who was going to kill them? A bunch of Holocaust survivors and farmers?
The Haganah and the Stern gangs, and they sent loudspeakers in the streets saying, "Remember Deir Yassin. Remember what happened in Deir Yassin. Get out now. Get out with the British.
Get out with the British." I'm just curious because by 1947, Salama was already abandoned. That's before 1948. So I'm trying to understand the timeline here.
That's not true. Salama was not did not fall in the hands of the Haganah till April 25th of 1948. And that Selma is my hometown, of course, as you know that probably.
Salma, your hometown, sent 200 people to raid my wife's hometown, Jaffa, in 1946. They sent 200 people to go there and massacre people. So I'm wondering what that has to do with 1948 and the creation of the State of Israel.
They were not going to massacring people. They weren't. The Palestinians were not massacring people. They were defending themselves against attacks from the Haganah and from the other gangs.
That's why they went to a family. That's why they went to a kibbutz and massacred people. Because I'm looking at a newspaper clipping of it right now.
I don't know whose favorite it is. There was fighting going on between both sides. They were all exchanging attacks at that time. The only forces that carried out massive massacres were the Zionist forces. There were 26 massacres between December of 1947 and January of 1949.
Speaking of massacres, will you condemn Hamas as a terrorist organization?
I don't condemn Hamas as a terrorist organization. In my opinion, Hamas is not a terrorist organization. It's a Palestinian organization engaged in self-defense and defending the Palestinians in Gaza against Israeli massive attacks using all the weaponry and all the weapon technology in the world.
So even though they're on the State Department, the U.S. State Department list of terrorist organizations, you don't believe they're a terrorist organization?
I don't think so. I don't believe they're a terrorist organization.
So when they fire rockets indiscriminately into Israel, not at military targets, they're not a terrorist organization?
Yeah, well, I mean, the U.S. doesn't have Israel on the terrorist list, which they should. And Israel not just fires rockets at Israel, takes out entire residential buildings, like 14 stories residential buildings, take them out with one bomb and destroy the entire building with whoever is in it. I'm just back to
the thing about Hamas not being a terrorist organization. You think that Hamas isn't a terrorist organization when they send people with suicide vests into pizza parlors?
Israel does worse things than that.
Like what?
Israel is a terrorist state, and Hamas is no more terrorist than Israel is a terrorist state.
Are you afraid of something happening?
Maybe both. If you could say both are terrorists, but you can't single out Hamas and say they're terrorists, because what Israel does is a lot more terrorism than any country in the world. Israel is the biggest terrorist state in the world, and it's an apartheid state that practices apartheid on a daily basis.
Excuse me. I can't let that stand. Can you tell me exactly how they practice apartheid when Arabs who are in Israel are allowed to be Supreme Court justices, are allowed to be members of the Knesset, which is their Congress, which are allowed to vote? Can you tell me how that's apartheid?
It's apartheid because there are roads under Israeli control. Only Jews can travel on, and non-Jews are not allowed on those roads.
Excuse me, which roads? I've been there. Which roads? Which roads?
Supply only.
Which roads?
Sorry?
Which roads? I've been there. Which roads?
All over the place.
Which roads? Name them.
All over the place.
Name them.
In the West Bank.
In the West Bank is not under Jewish control. The West Bank is under Palestinian control. Which roads?
No, most of the West Bank is under Israeli control.
It's under control of the Palestinian Authority by Mahmoud Abbas, who has been the president for a 4-year term for close to 20 years. The Backstreet Boys were the #1 performing artists in the U.S. the last time there were elections in the West Bank.
Now, the roads that I'm talking about are Israeli roads. And
you just said they're in the West Bank.
People can't go on those roads.
You just said they're in the West Bank. Those aren't Israeli roads.
They are in the West Bank. Israel created hundreds of settlements in the West Bank, and they built an infrastructure around those settlements, including roads, water supply, all kinds of things that are strictly allowed for Jewish people only. Non-Jewish people are not allowed on those roads. It's just like South Africa. The whites were not allowed. We're banning the blacks from going on certain roads.
So you're telling me if I walked into Gaza right now, I'd be welcomed in with open arms?
Well, if you want to come in as a visitor in peace, they'll allow you to visit.
Really? Because there's signs everywhere that I've seen for myself that say no Jews allowed past this point. So you're telling me I'd be welcome into Gaza with open arms?
You want to go to Gaza as a journalist, they'll welcome you in open arms.
Really? Because that hasn't been my experience so far.
There are thousands of journalists there. They're all from different countries around the world. You will be the first one they'll let in.
Really? So you have to be a journalist to go, but as a regular Jew, you can't go in?
No. Well, Israelis are not allowed into Gaza, just like Gazans are not allowed into Israel.
Gazans are allowed into Israel.
From.
Gazans are allowed into Israel. They go through to work all the time. In fact, they complain all the time when checkpoints are closed. They are allowed into Israel.
Well, they have to go through permits and all that. And
you mean like going through a border like I go through between the U.S. and Canada? Every country has borders.
Yeah, but the Canadian border is a walk in the park compared to what you have to go through and going into the checkpoints, the checkpoint hell, and you probably heard about that.
I've been there. I've seen it.
Israel has like hundreds of checkpoints. No Palestinian can travel more than like 10 minutes without running into a checkpoint.
Do you think that's maybe because of Hamas, which you claim isn't a terrorist organization?
That's not because of Hamas. That's because Israel want to restrict the Palestinians' movement, and they want to make their life hell so they can leave, and Israel can confiscate the land and make more of the area be Jewish, 100% Jewish only.
In 2009, didn't Israel turn over the entire Gaza Strip to the Palestinian Authority, and then they elected Hamas?
They left Gaza, they left it because they were getting their ass kicked there by the Palestinians all the time, and they were having a lot of casualties, and they could not stay there anymore.
So that's why they left, not because it was a land for peace deal.
No, it was no land for peace deal.
No land for peace. So there was no peace ever promised, is what you're saying.
No, Israel does not want to have peace with the Palestinians. They want the Palestinians to get out. They want to get rid of the Palestinians.
In your mind, what does a future Palestinian state look like?
A future Palestinian state is a state that's democratic, that Jews, Muslims, Christians, Palestinian, Israelis can live together under the rule of law, a law that is democratic, that does not discriminate against people based on their religion or national ethnic background, the way the current Israeli law does.
So, in your mind, there shouldn't be a future state of Israel. It should just be a Palestinian state?
You can call it anything you want. There are like 4 million, 5 million Palestinians and 5, 6 million Israelis, and they're all in the same area. They're going to need to live together. They can live together in peace if they all agree to be equal under the law and treated equally. And if the Palestinians are compensated for the lost property that was taken away from them and allowed to live equally under the same law, I think that is the future of the area. There's no other future other than that. Other than that, it's going to be war for the next 100 years.
You said it. Before I let you go, do you still have family in the West Bank or Gaza?
I don't have immediate family. I grew up in the Ramallah area. Most of my family are in the U.S. now, and I have some in the Gulf area. I have a lot of friends, of course, and relatives and things like that.
Gotcha. Okay. Well, thank you very much. Excuse me. Let me make sure I got your name right here. Faisal Saleh, the executive director of the Palestine Museum in Connecticut. Thank you very much for joining us today. Do appreciate it.
Thank you, Ari. Thank you for having me on your show. It's a great pleasure to meet you.
Pleasure to have you as well. We got a whole lot more to discuss as the show continues. You're listening to the Ari Hoffman Show on Talk Radio 570 KVI.